Hi, I'm Zibby Owens, and I am the host of this podcast, Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. I am also a newly minted USA Today best-selling author of the novel Blank. I've created a whole community of book lovers around this podcast, a publishing company, reading retreats, a bookstore, and more. Learn more at zibbymedia.com or follow me on social at Zibby Owens or join the community at Zibby Readers. Elissa Strauss is the author of When You Care, The Unexpected Magic of Caring for Others. Elissa has been a journalist, essayist, and opinion writer for the past 15 years. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, The Atlantic, Glamour, Elle, Allure, The American Prospect, and elsewhere. She's been a contributing writer for CNN, where she covered the culture and politics of parenthood, as well as at Slate, where she wrote on feminism and motherhood. Since 2011, she has been an artistic director of LABA, L-A-B-A, a laboratory for Jewish culture. She lives in Oakland, California with her family. Welcome, Elissa. Thank you so much for coming on Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books to discuss When You Care, the unexpected magic of caring for others. Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
It's nice to have a book that doesn't demonize sort of caregiving completely, right? That's not just like, there's too much on your plate, take it off, but that embraces the fact that this is something that we do and, you know, we are still people, even though we care for other people, right? Essentially.
Yes. Yeah. And in fact, we're sometimes more of people because we care for other people, right? You know, it adds, it takes away, but it also adds.
Agreed. So tell me about how you started writing this book. Tell me about your career before the book. Tell me about your caregiving. Just go. I'll just sit back.
Yeah. Listen, it's actually all one tidy story. So my career before the book, I've been in the kind that was, part of the great feminist blogosphere of the tens, which was a really fun moment in women's writing. And around the time I had kids, I wrote a lot about the intersection of motherhood and feminism, mostly focused on all the ways moms are left out, discriminated against in the workplace, the maternal mortality crisis, the fact that we don't have paid leave, the fact that we don't have universal and affordable childcare, all these things that hold moms back that are so real, so very real. And I kind of wrote story after story. And at some point, actually, there was a discrete moment where I saw a story in the New York Times in which a source was quoted about how poorly we treat, new mothers in hospitals. And it was the same source giving the same quote to the New York Times 4 years after I'd written about the same story with the same source in Slate. And it didn't mean like, oh, everyone should stop writing about this. Like, absolutely, we need to keep, banging on that drum as loud as we can. But there was something in me that felt like, you know what, this is bigger than policy. We can say over and over again, hey, we're the only industrialized country in the world that doesn't have paid leave. But like, it's not just politicians not figuring out how to make this work. There must be like something deeper underneath it, like cultural roots of the care crisis. So that set me off. Meanwhile, the other kind of thread that led me to this book is when I became a mom, I felt very strongly I had to almost protect myself from the colonizing force that I perceived motherhood to be. Now, I want to be clear. I wasn't ambivalent about having kids. I grew up one of four. My parents seemed to just really genuinely, authentically love being parents. I always liked kids. So it wasn't the question of if I should have kids. And it also wasn't a question of ambivalence about my, feelings for my kids. I was lucky to not have any real postpartum anxiety or depression. And had a relatively, babies are kind of a nightmare. Even the sweetest, cutest babies, easiest babies are kind of, they're hard. But a few years into it, like I was enjoying parenting. It felt natural for me to be with Augie, my first son. But I felt very much like I had to keep motherhood separate from everything else because it would make me unserious intellectually, uncool in creative circles. That it was kind of, the part of me that I shouldn't talk about anywhere else except when I was being a mom. So it took me a minute to realize that I had spent all this time being like furious at the world for not valuing care, but actually I didn't value care. I didn't see it as actually part of a meaningful, interesting life in a deep way. And I once I realized that, I was like, oh, there's work to do. Like, this isn't just about blaming everyone else. It's actually digging into myself and into our society and figuring out like, why don't we see parenting and caregiving as a hero's journey? Why do we view it as a footnote to life instead of the, very material of life itself?
Mm-hmm.
And so I began.
It's funny because when I first saw the book, I was like, oh, this is going to be about elder care, which God knows why I thought that. There's nothing that.
Well, no, I think the word care is mostly associated with elder care. And, that's part of like the challenge of the book is to really point out like care's everywhere. We spend half of our lives in care relationships, and some of us spend basically our whole lives on one side of a care relationship. So, right. But it is a tricky thing. We still don't have the language. I don't think you're alone.
Interesting. Well, I mean, when you think about the importance of not off-putting loneliness, stemming loneliness, right? The importance of not being lonely.
Yeah.
Caregiving is the immediate antidote to that, right? And people live longer when they're with other people. I mean, obviously you're the expert in all of this, but it seems like so fundamental to longevity and life itself and satisfaction and all these basic things to be in a relationship in which you care deeply about the person, whether you have to, brush their hair or change a diaper or, wheel them down the hall in whatever, a wheelchair or a stroller, whatever.
Right.
Right. Then you've got this immediate protection against ever feeling that loneliness and isolation.
Yeah. And, and it can be like lonely too, right? As a caregiver, I know new moms could be, they can have high rates of loneliness, but I think but at the same time, like, right, when we kind of invest in our relationships and we see relationships as part of self-actualization of learning who we are and what it means to be a human, and it kind of changes, right, the whole experience and makes it a place of growth and excitement and challenge and struggle, but not one that only somehow detracts from who we are, one that brings us more fully into ourselves and into our connections with other people.
So when you approach this as a book, how did you conceive of this originally? How close is this to how you set out to write it, all of that?
Yeah, so I think originally it was a mom book. It was just going to be about my experience with motherhood. And my agent thought that it would be interesting to expand it to care more broadly. And, there's a challenge to that because caring for kids is generally a more optimistic endeavor than caring for someone with terminal cancer, obviously, or Lewy body dementia. So there is a challenge to it, but I still felt like I wanted to rise up to the challenge and really kind of dig into just the reality that humans depend on other humans, that we'd like to think of ourselves as these like independent beings that can always take care of ourselves, but that's just not the reality of life. And so that's one way it changed. And then I think, the other way it changed was seeing that like my story really had to be part of it. That at first I thought it would kind of just be in the introduction and then pass it over to the research. But it actually, and then, the first pass with my editor, she's like, where are you? And I was like, I thought you didn't want me. I was just another Brooklyn mom. Like, who needs to, and then she's like, no, we want you. And that actually was a whole other layer of challenge. So I have a chapter on care and philosophy and care, that parenting and caregiving is like a real philosophical awakening, but also one that Western philosophy ignored until like literally 1980. The fact that, we depend on each other in relationships just like didn't occur to most Western philosophers. So not only did I dig into all these amazing philosophers who are digging into care and showing how it's this place of like real epiphany of what does it mean to be a person, to live a good life, to do the right thing, but actually I had to think about like, what does that mean for me? And the same with a chapter on care and spirituality or theology. There's all these like amazing, right, kind of feminist theologians that are like, why isn't care at the center of the religious experience? Like what's more kind of holy, and whatever that means to anyone, whether there's actually God behind holy or just a sense of like transcendence and otherness and being part of something bigger. What's really more holy than care? It's like honoring that holy quality, the divine in another. And I had to think about how actually my experience with something some days I call God, even if I don't know what it means, was totally changed by care. And I'm Jewish, and it like deepened and enriched my practice as a Jew and my like my kind of, it sounds so big and mighty, but my like sense of connection with the universe caring for my kids. And also now I love Shabbat because it's like a Friday night dinner. We actually talk to each other. There's no sense of homework. And it's like that ancient technology on a practical level is huge for my ability to like appreciate and enjoy and grow from care. So that's, that was like the second layer of this book, was not just looking at how this is working for everyone else and all these really cool thinkers who are thinking about, care and economics and care and psychology, but having to bring it to myself and really put myself to the test and be like, how are you, Elissa, being changed by care?
And so how have you changed the most?
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing for me, my first big like epiphany by way of care came with Augie, my first son, who he was always a very practical, reserved kid. He wasn't your typical tantrum toddler. I had one of those, Levi, so don't worry, everyone. I know what it's like. But Augie was always like almost too reasonable, too rational. If he, had taken that marshmallow test that, if you wait, you get a marshmallow. There's a psychology test that teaches kids ability to like think of the future. And he would almost do too well on it. It's like, he was the kind of kid you're like, just eat the marshmallow, Augie, eat the marshmallow. Stop like thinking through everything so much. So I had this kid who really wanted to understand the world, who didn't actually rely on intuition and impulse like most, of his peers, but really had this like need to figure it out. And at the time, I was, back in that feminist blogosphere, it was literally my job every day to send my editor 6 ideas of pieces I would write. She would pick one. And by the end of the day, I would turn out, 800 words with a hard-edged opinion on something that was happening in the world. It was just a little opinion machine. And I didn't realize until being with Augie and having to take a step back and not just know everything and, I had this sense that I was just understood the world and I knew exactly where everything stood and like this was good and this was bad and this was okay and this wasn't okay. And we do this, but we don't do that. And then I have this kid, Augie, who like needs actually me to not be that way, needs me to make space for him, needs me to get him not to listen to me, but listen to himself. And it really, I joke like motherhood ruined my career, but not how people think. I got really tired of thinking that way. And it made me realize what a closed way of living that was. And I was actually, thinking I understood everything and thinking I was getting everything right, but actually was just constantly like slamming the window shut on other possibilities. And it was really profound for me to, I think we speak a lot about how do we be less certain and how psychologically healthy that is. But I rarely see caregiving and parenting as like a vehicle for that. People go on meditation retreats and do all sorts of things. And for me, being so close to another human and having to look through the world through their eyes held this mirror to the self that was like unlike anything I had ever experienced.
So interesting. It's funny. My husband and I were talking. I have 4 kids, and one of them is sort of going through just like responding to things differently than the other ones, and whatever. And he was like, my husband's a big football fan. He's like, you can't call the same plays on every kid. Like every kid is different. Like you have to change how you are parenting. Like,
right.
Because the same thing is not going to work. And I was like, I thought I was good at that, but actually I guess I'm not. He's like, you like to do everything right away, but that doesn't mean your kids are all going to get everything done right away. And I was like, everybody doesn't like that. You know what I mean? Like, let's just order the shoes, But I think you're right. You have to, if you don't look at yourself, you can't be as good a parent. Even and it's humbling because it never ends. Like just never.
Right, exactly. And it's I feel like people seek this kind of realization, self-actualization, all these places all the time that they get celebrated for. If someone hikes Mount Everest and you go to a dinner party, on one side of the table there's a parent of a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old. On the other side of the table there's someone who just hiked Mount Everest. Everyone's eyes are on, Mr. Everest as the one who like learned a lot about what it means to live and be a human. no one's eyes are on the parent, but I feel like that parent, like they both should be
Totally.
on the menu. That parent's also learning a lot. And right, and it's constantly changing. And it's just this like constant source of kind of growth and renewal and challenge. And sometimes it just sucks. I don't want to ignore that. Sometimes it's just hard. And there's not this kind of necessarily positive growth. But I think so often the hard stuff is actually so bound up with this kind of expansion of self that's
Mhm.
so meaningful.
Hmm. So where do you go from here?
In terms of care or writing
No.
or
In terms of everything. Like, is there, I'm waiting for you to say, like, and I've started a nonprofit. We're dedicated to, like, are we doing advocacy, education, more writing? Like, where do we take this message?
yeah, I mean, I think for me, like honestly, the most important thing I want people to get from my book is real curiosity about care. If that is what we get, I think it's a win. I want people to, and curiosity about themselves, again, when I say as caregivers, parents and caregivers, like view what you're doing as a hero's journey. View yourself on this, like, in December, George Clooney had the book, sorry, had the movie come out, The Boy in the Boat, and it was kind of a
Mhm.
classic Hollywood hero's journey trailer of the music kind of
Yep,
gets
yep,
slow and then it's faster and louder. And
yep.
like, listen to that soundtrack for yourself as a parent and caregiver. Like, see it as this big, amazing thing that's as important as anything else people do, and not again this footnote to life, but like life itself. And I really hope this book helps us understand that we're not going to solve the very real care crisis that we're in until we look at the cultural roots of it. We see, right, in Christianity, for example, and so many cool Christian theologians I spoke to for the book. One points out that if you go and volunteer and care for a stranger, you're like literally a saint. I mean, Mother Teresa, you're like actually can be, if you care for strangers, saint. If you care for, as she put it, the naked and poor in your home, no one's even interested in you. No one's trying to make the religious community work for you. And it's like these blind spots are so woven into our culture. When they were creating the GDP back in the 40s, it was something they created after the Great Depression. A female economist, Phyllis Dean, went with the group of economists to Africa to figure out, like, how are we going to determine a nation's wealth? Like, what would this even look like? And at the time, she was like, I think you guys are forgetting something. Like, you're forgetting women's work. And we still don't count as part of the GDP. And so that's another, it's like these blind spots to care are so woven in. If we counted care economically, it would be worth basically as much as the whole retail sector.
Mm.
It is a huge part of the economic engine, but we don't. And I think caregivers, moms, we internalize that. When I took, and I'm no economist, I'm a lousy mathematician, but I did some back of the envelope accounting after I like learned how these economists like figured out the value of care economically. And I did it for my own household. And I was like, wait a minute, I earn as much as my husband. And it was so profound, and not that we should feel like we only matter, how our worth in the world is connected to how much money we make or don't make. But let me tell you, there's something of like realizing that if we actually valued care, if we were able to put a dollar sign on it, like I am not contributing to the wage gap. We're both contributing to the economy in equal measure. So I think we need to pull off all these layers of these cultural narratives that ignore care and put it back at the center of the human story where it belongs. One more example, Charles Darwin. We all think like survival of the fittest, right? Humans are competitive. Actually, Darwin was equally invested in sympathy, or what we might call care today, as one of like the main reasons we evolved and we survived as a species. But like we don't, who learned that? None of us learned that. We just think survival of the fittest, competition. So that's the big objective with the book. Put care back at the center where it belongs. See all the ways it's been kind of systemically like pushed aside over the years. And then from there, hopefully build a world that actually values and supports moms and other dads and all types of caregivers.
I love that. On the writing front, how did that go? And then what advice would you give for aspiring authors?
Yeah, the writing, I think because I've been writing on deadline forever, it's just been my job. It's that part is, it was training. I had spent 10 years as like a mostly online journalist, again, churning out stuff. So that part went okay. It's a slow process, which I think, many people know, like publishing is much slower than online journalism. But it's also for me such a gift to have time to digest, dig deeper, and think. And I think for aspiring authors, it's so hard to like believe this was I think the big thing for me, right? And to believe your story matters, to believe what you think matters. It's still something I'm undoing, I'm learning that, I think we can definitely attribute it to the patriarchy as a woman, like that your ideas matter, that your story matters, that especially domestic care stories, these things that happen in our homes, they really matter. And again, we've always seen them as somehow smaller than what happens outside the home. And they're not, they're just as big.
Amazing. And a quick writing advice? Any writing advice?
Writing advice. That is a good question. What is my writing advice? Let me think.
Or research. I mean, you did so much research.
Yeah. I think for writing advice, don't be afraid to take your time. I think, there's a sense that we're in a hurry, but like this book, it's here now and it lives here and it's this found object. And I'm glad I took my time. I'm glad I spent a year thinking of this as a motherhood book and then another year realizing it's a caregiving book and then selling it and having these long breaks between edits. Or we live in such a fast culture. We live in such a time of like, it's either it happens now or never, immediate gratification. And a book is an object that lives on, And so I think it just really enjoy the slower pace of writing a book and let it be almost like the Shabbat of your writing career, that it's a time to slow down and be just in that moment and have patience with it.
Maybe that could be a new writing technique, only writing on Shabbat,
I know someone in San Francisco who does writing groups on Shabbat. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
How many Shabbats would it take to write a book?
I mean, there's something though, right? Like if you can really, like, it just creates one more tool to kind of push the noise outside, push the like hustle culture aside, and just be in your head. And it's a gift.
Plus,
the book's for you too, right? It's not it's for your readers, but it's also for you.
It's true. Plus, wine, challah. It's a good deal.
Yeah, exactly. Fire.
Fire. Family. Yeah. I don't know. Couldn't make it any better.
Yeah, anyway. Exactly.
Well, Elissa, congratulations on When You Care. Well done. And, very important and really important for everybody to read and internalize and, lots of marrow to suck out of this one.
Thank you.
All right. Well, take care. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. If you love it, please leave a review and follow us on social @Zibby Owens and @Zibby Readers.